He thought it was just a sword, until Sarai whispered its true name. Etherium. As Kalis's crimson beams struck, Taven channeled the ancient blade's power, feeling knowledge surge through his veins. Awakener's blade. Etherium. I call you, he shouted. Blinding light erupted, shattering Kalis's mind and breaking Saray's bonds. A scavenger's destiny reforged in that single, devastating moment. Ash swirled in eddies across the broken plaza, particles catching the harsh light of twin suns that burned through the perpetual haze. Taven Reese pulled his filtration mask tighter and squinted against the glare. The ruins of Alara's light stretched before him, a maze of toppled spires and half-collapsed buildings that had once been the crown jewel of the Northern Territories. Now it was just another dead city, silent except for the whisper of ash and the occasional groan of settling stone. Taven adjusted the salvage pack on his shoulders, feeling the weight of his meager findings. 3 days of scavenging had yielded little more than a handful of power cells and some corroded circuitry, barely enough to trade for a week's rations back at Outpost Kell. He needed something better, something worth the risk of venturing this deep into the ruins. He paused to check his navigation tablet, the cracked screen flickering as it struggled to map the ever-shifting landscape. The Temple District should be just ahead, largely unexplored due to the unpredictable ash storms that seemed to center on it. Legends spoke of treasures within the ancient halls, relics from before the cataclysm. Most scavengers avoided the area, preferring the more accessible commercial districts with their predictable halls of industrial metals and tech. But Taven wasn't most scavengers. Desperation had a way of making a man brave or foolish. Sometimes the line between the two blurred beyond recognition. As he approached the Temple District, the twin suns disappeared behind a particularly dense cloud of ash, casting the ruins in an eerie twilight. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Taven suppressed a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The massive structures loomed ahead, their once gleaming facades now pitted and scarred by 2 centuries of ashfall. The central temple dominated the skyline, a colossal edifice of black stone that had somehow withstood the cataclysm better than the surrounding buildings. Its spire, though cracked and leaning precariously, still reached toward the sky like an accusing finger. Taven had heard stories about this place during his childhood in the orphanage at Outpost Kell. Tales of the Order of the Awakener, keepers of ancient knowledge and power. Children's stories, nothing more. The kind of fables that gave orphans hope that, someday, someone powerful would come and save them all. No one had saved the children when the raiders came. No one had saved his friends when disease swept through the outpost 3 winters ago. Taven had survived by running, by hiding, by taking what he needed and moving on before the guilt could catch up to him. He pushed the memories away and focused on the task at hand. The temple entrance was partially collapsed, but there was enough space for him to squeeze through. He activated his shoulder lamp and ducked inside, the beam cutting through darkness that felt older than the ruins themselves. The interior was surprisingly intact. Massive columns rose to support a ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was littered with debris and ash that had blown in through collapsed sections, but the fundamental structure remained sound. Taven's footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the temple, his light playing across walls covered in faded murals depicting robed figures with raised hands, intricate geometric patterns surrounding them. Hours passed as Taven methodically searched the temple's main hall, finding little of value. Some decorative metalwork too heavy to carry, tarnished ceremonial objects of unknown purpose. He was about to move on when his lamp illuminated a partially collapsed side chamber. Something gleamed in the rubble. Taven approached cautiously, wary of unstable flooring. As he drew closer, he saw it was a sword, half buried in fallen masonry. The blade was unlike any he had seen before, a strange black alloy that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The hilt was unadorned except for a series of faintly glowing glyphs etched into the crossguard. "Not bad," Taven muttered to himself, voice muffled by his mask. "Should fetch a decent price, if nothing else." He knelt and began carefully clearing away the debris. The sword was longer than he'd initially thought, nearly the length of his arm. As he worked it free, he was surprised by how light it felt, as if it were hollow or made of some composite material rather than solid metal. With the sword finally extracted, Taven sat back on his heels to examine his find. The edge was dull after centuries of neglect, but the blade itself was remarkably intact, showing no signs of rust or corrosion. Just ancient salvage, but better than returning empty-handed. Taven slipped the sword into his pack and continued his exploration, working his way deeper into the temple complex. The corridors became narrower, the signs of collapse more frequent. He squeezed through a partially blocked doorway and found himself in what appeared to be a meditation chamber, circular in design, with a raised dais in the center. As he crossed the room, his foot caught on something, sending him stumbling forward. The sword slipped from his pack, clattering against the stone floor. Cursing, Taven knelt to retrieve it, running his hand along the dull edge. He would need to sharpen it if he wanted to get a good price. On impulse, he drew the blade across a nearby piece of fallen stone. The contact produced an unexpected sound, not the screech of metal on stone, but a deep, resonant chord that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Taven froze, the hair on the back of his neck rising. The sound lingered, growing in intensity rather than fading. Outside, the perpetual whisper of the ash storm suddenly stilled, as if the entire world were holding its breath. Then, with a grinding mechanical whine, lights flickered to life in the ceiling, ancient illumination systems awakening after 2 centuries of dormancy. The temple around him hummed with awakening energy. Taven stood, sword clutched in his hand, as panels in the walls slid open to reveal gleaming metal constructs, their once polished surfaces now pitted and discolored by age. Defense pylons. Taven had seen their like before, in the ruins of government buildings, automated security systems designed to protect high-value locations. They were supposed to be long dead, their power sources exhausted centuries ago. Red targeting beams lanced out, centering on Taven's chest. Shit! He dove behind a fallen column as energy bolts scorched the air where he had stood moments before. The pylons advanced with mechanical precision, their joints groaning with disuse, but still functional. Taven scrambled backward, keeping low, the sword clutched awkwardly in one hand. A bolt struck near his head, showering him with stone fragments. Another seared across his arm, burning through his jacket to the skin beneath. Taven bit back a cry of pain and rolled to his feet, sprinting for the doorway through which he had entered. More pylons activated ahead, blocking his path, trapped. Taven spun around, searching for another exit. Across the chamber, a narrow corridor beckoned. He ran for it, zigzagging to avoid the increasing barrage of energy bolts. As he passed the central dais, the sword in his hand pulsed with light, the glyphs on its crossguard flaring briefly. In that moment of illumination, Taven noticed identical symbols carved into the floor and walls of the chamber, concentric circles and angular runes that matched those on the murals he had seen earlier. The Order of the Awakener. This was their temple, their sword, and he had just woken something up. Taven burst into the corridor. The pursuing pylons slowed by the narrow passage. He ran blindly, taking turns at random, desperate to put distance between himself and the awakened defenses. The temple was a labyrinth, and he quickly lost all sense of direction. The only certainty was that he was heading downward, each turn taking him deeper beneath the surface. After what seemed like hours of frantic flight, Taven stumbled into a vast circular chamber. Unlike the dusty, debris-strewn areas above, this room was pristine, as if sealed against time itself. The walls were lined with what appeared to be stasis pods, their transparent surfaces frosted over with age. In the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, upon which rested a single pod, larger than the others. Taven approached cautiously, sword still in hand. The pod in the center was different, not covered in frost but clear, allowing him to see its occupant. A woman lay within, her features perfect and unmarked by age. She appeared to be sleeping, her chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Her dark hair framed a face both serene and severe, and she wore robes similar to those depicted in the temple murals, though hers were black rather than the white shown in the images. The sword in Taven's hand suddenly grew warm, the glyphs along its crossguard pulsing with increasing intensity. Before he could react, the blade leapt from his grasp as if pulled by an invisible force. It hovered in the air above the stasis pod, spinning slowly, the glyphs now burning with blue-white fire. With a hiss of escaping gas, the pod began to open. The woman's eyes snapped open, eyes of such intense blue they seemed to glow from within. They fixed immediately on Taven, then on the floating sword. Her lips parted. "Give it back." Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but carried the unmistakable tone of command. She sat up, the stasis pod fully open now, and extended her hand toward the hovering blade. Taven stood frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. What are you?" The woman's gaze never left the sword. "I am Sci-Fi of the Order, last heir of the Awakener, and you have taken what is not yours to take." The sword drifted toward her outstretched hand, but Taven, acting on instinct, snatched it from the air. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, a shock ran through his body, driving him to his knees. Images flooded his mind, the temple in its glory days, filled with robed acolytes, the woman, Sci-Fi, younger, training with the very sword he now held, a man with cold eyes and a cruel smile, sealing Sci-Fi into the stasis pod as she screamed defiance. The vision passed, leaving Taven gasping on the chamber floor, the sword still clutched in his trembling hand. Sci-Fi had risen from the pod and now stood over him, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "You should not be able to touch the Awakener's blade," she said, her voice stronger now. "Only those of the Order." She stopped, studying his face with new intensity. "Unless the bloodlines have thinned in my absence. How long have I slumbered?" Taven struggled to his feet, keeping a wary distance. "If you're asking when the cataclysm happened, it was about 200 years ago, give or take a decade." Sci-Fi's composure faltered for the first time. 2 centuries? Impossible. The stasis protocols were set for 20 years, no more. She closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. Kalis. He altered the settings, of course. 200 years. Everyone I knew is dead. The Order. Gone, Taven confirmed. Just stories told to children now. The world moved on. Or what's left of it, anyway. Sci-Fi's eyes snapped open, focusing on the sword in his hand. Not everything is gone. You hold the legacy of the Order in your hands. Thief. A legacy you have desecrated by your touch. Taven bristled at the accusation. "I'm a scavenger, not a thief. There's a difference. The sword was abandoned in rubble. Fair salvage." "Fair," Sci-Fi's voice rose. "You speak of fairness while holding the most powerful artifact in Alara's light? The Awakener's blade is not some trinket to be bartered for scraps. It is the key to the heart of worlds, the last defense against the very destruction that has clearly claimed this land. Look, lady, I don't know anything about hearts or worlds or whatever. I found a sword in some ruins. That's it." Taven took a step back, angling toward the exit. "If it means that much to you, take it. I've got enough problems without adding argument with a 200-year-old woman to the list." He held out the sword, eager to be rid of it and the complications it brought. But as Sarai reached for it, alarms began to sound throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed, and a mechanical voice echoed from hidden speakers. Perimeter breach detected. Multiple entities approaching central chamber. Defense systems compromised. Saray's expression hardened. The temple's outer wards have fallen. Someone is coming. She looked at Taven with renewed suspicion. Did you lead them here? Lead who? I came alone. And I was trying to leave before your security system tried to kill me. Saray moved to a control panel near her stasis pod and passed her hand over it. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the temple's exterior. A group of heavily armed figures was advancing through the ruins, methodically disabling the defense pylons as they went. Scavengers, Taven said, recognizing their equipment. But better organized than most. That's military-grade hardware they're carrying. Sarai studied the display, her expression grim. They seek the blade. They must not find it. Or me. She turned to Taven. You awakened me, whether by accident or design. Now you have a choice. Help me defend this place, or die with the secrets you have uncovered. Taven scowled. That's not much of a choice. It is the only one I can offer. Sarai extended her hand. The blade, if you please. I cannot face them without it. Taven hesitated, then shook his head. No offense, but you've been asleep for 2 centuries. I'm guessing you're not exactly in fighting shape. I've survived this long by knowing when to run and when to hide. This is definitely a running situation. There is nowhere to run, Sarai said flatly. The invaders have secured the upper levels. The only exit is through them. Taven glanced at the display, confirming her assessment. The scavengers had indeed blocked the route he had taken into the temple. He sighed, weighing the sword in his hand. Fine. We work together. Then. But I keep the sword for now. Consider it insurance that you won't just leave me to die once we reach the surface. Saray's eyes narrowed. But after a moment, she nodded. Agreed. But you must allow me to guide you in its use. The Awakener's blade is not a common weapon. It responds to will and intent as much as physical strength. I know how to use a sword, Taven said defensively. Do you know how to channel resonant energy through dimensional fault lines? How to disrupt quantum entanglement with a focused thought? Sarai asked. Her tone, making it clear, she already knew the answer. Taven blinked. It's a sword. You stick the pointy end in the bad guys. Sarai closed her eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. Follow me. There is a maintenance passage that should still be accessible. We can use it to reach the upper levels undetected. She led him to a seemingly solid wall, placed her palm against it, and murmured words in a language Taven didn't recognize. The wall shimmered and became transparent, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. Neat trick, Taven said, genuinely impressed. Not a trick. Technology, augmented by trained mental discipline. Sarai stepped through the now permeable wall. The Order merged science and what some would call magic centuries before the cataclysm. We saw no distinction between the two. Taven followed, the strange sensation of passing through solid matter sending shivers down his spine. The maintenance tunnel was cramped, forcing them to proceed in single file. Emergency lighting strips along the floor provided minimal illumination, flickering erratically after centuries of neglect. So what exactly were you guarding down there? Taven asked, as they climbed a steep incline. Must have been important to put you in suspended animation for it. Sarai didn't look back as she replied. The Heart of Worlds, a power source unlike any other, drawn from the intersection of dimensional planes. The Order was formed to protect it, to ensure it was never misused. In the wrong hands, it could tear reality apart. And let me guess, these scavengers want it for themselves? If they know of the heart, yes. But more likely they seek the blade first. It is the key to accessing the heart's chamber. Sarai paused at a junction, considering their path. The Awakener's blade was forged from materials not of this dimension, allowing it to interact with the heart. In the hands of an untrained wielder, it can still channel tremendous power. Is that why it made that sound when I scraped it? Woke up all your security robots? Sarai glanced back at him, reassessing. You activated its resonance, unintentionally? She seemed both impressed and troubled by this revelation. The blade responds to bloodline as much as training. Perhaps there is more to you than appears. Taven Reese. How do you know my name? I never told you. The blade knows. And now. So do I. Sarai resumed walking. When you touched it, a connection was formed, temporary, but sufficient to glean surface thoughts and memories. Taven wasn't sure he liked the idea of this strange woman poking around in his head. Stay out of my memories. They're not pretty, and they're none of your business. I have no interest in your past, scavenger. Only in ensuring you do not interfere with my duty. Sarai stopped before another seemingly solid wall. We are beneath the training halls now. The invaders will likely be searching the main temple complex first. If we move quickly, we can reach the archives and seal ourselves inside. She passed her hand over the wall as she had done before, but this time nothing happened. Frowning, she tried again, pressing her palm flat against the surface and closing her eyes in concentration. The power conduits to this section must be damaged, she said, frustration evident in her voice. The resonance matrix cannot be activated without energy. Taven stepped forward, holding up the sword. Would this help? You said it channels power, right? Sarai hesitated, then nodded. Press the blade against the wall. Just here. She indicated a spot that appeared no different from the surrounding surface to Taven's eyes. Focus on the desire to pass through, to open the way. Feeling slightly foolish, Taven did as instructed. To his surprise, the sword began to vibrate in his hand, the glyphs on its crossguard glowing faintly. The wall before them rippled like water, then became transparent as it had before. Well done, Sarai said, a hint of surprise in her voice. Your connection to the blade is stronger than I anticipated. They emerged into a large hall with a high ceiling. Once a training ground for the Order, it now lay in ruins, portions of the roof having collapsed to allow ash and debris to filter in. Practice dummies and training equipment lay scattered about, covered in a thick layer of dust. As they crossed the hall, a sudden crash from above made them both freeze. Voices echoed down from a collapsed section of ceiling, rough, commanding tones giving orders to spread out and search every corner. The invaders, Sarai whispered. They've reached this level sooner than I expected. Taven pulled her behind a fallen column, just as a beam of light swept across the room from above. They pressed themselves against the cold stone, hardly daring to breathe as booted feet moved across the floor above their heads. Nothing but junk down there, a voice called. No sign of the primary target. Keep looking, another voice commanded. The sensors detected energy signatures in this sector. The blade is here somewhere. Taven glanced at Sarai, mouthing primary target with raised eyebrows. She shook her head slightly, indicating now was not the time for questions. They remained hidden until the searchers moved on, then continued their careful progress through the training hall toward a set of massive bronze doors at the far end. The doors stood partially open, one having fallen from its hinges over the centuries. The archives, Sarai murmured. If any knowledge of the Order survived, it will be there. As they approached the doors, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Taven recognized the sound an instant before a defense pylon rose from a concealed compartment in the floor, its targeting system already locked onto them. Down, he shouted, pulling Sarai to the ground as energy bolts lanced overhead. The pylon tracked their movement, adjusting its aim. Use the blade, Sarai called over the din. Focus on disrupting its targeting systems. Taven raised the sword, trying to concentrate as Sarai had instructed, but panic made it difficult to focus. The pylon fired again, a bolt grazing his shoulder and sending pain shooting down his arm. "I can't," he gasped. Sarai crawled to his side, placing her hand over his on the sword's hilt. "Together, then. Follow my lead." A strange calm washed over Taven as their hands touched. He felt Saray's consciousness brush against his, not invasive as before, but guiding, showing him how to channel his will through the blade. The sword began to hum, its vibration increasing until it emitted a pure, high note that made Taven's teeth ache. The defense pylon faltered, its lights flickering. With a mechanical groan, it powered down, slumping inert on its mounting. "How did you do that?" Taven asked, breathing hard. "Not I. We—" Saray stood, helping him to his feet. The blade amplifies intent, particularly when wielded by those with the proper attunement. Your natural connection, however unexpected, combined with my training, created a resonance the defense systems could not withstand. Before Taven could respond, more alarms sounded throughout the temple. The mechanical voice announced, "Multiple breaches detected, primary defenses offline, security lockdown initiated." "They're shutting down the temple's systems," Sarai said, her expression grave. "We must reach the archives before they are sealed." They sprinted for the bronze doors, slipping through into a vast circular chamber lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. Ancient texts and data crystals filled the shelves, preserved by environmental controls that had somehow survived the centuries. In the center of the room stood a crystalline pedestal, its surface etched with the same glyphs that adorned the sword's crossguard. Saray rushed to the pedestal, placing her hands upon it. The crystal glowed in response, projecting holographic displays in the air around her. "The heart still exists," she said, relief evident in her voice as she scanned the data. "Its containment remains stable, though power levels are critically low." She turned to Taven. "We must restore the primary wards before the invaders discover its location." "Hold on," Taven said, raising his hands. "I agreed to help you get out of here, not sign up for some mystical mission. I don't know anything about hearts or wards or whatever else you're talking about." Saray fixed him with a penetrating stare. "You held the blade. You awakened me. You are bound to this now, whether you wish it or not." "That's not fair. I didn't ask for any of this." "Fair?" Saray's voice was bitter. "Was it fair when Kalis betrayed the order? When he sealed me away and attempted to take the blade for himself? When the cataclysm he helped engineer destroyed everything we had built?" She gestured to the ruins around them. "Life is seldom fair. Taven Reese. We make choices, and we live with the consequences." Taven wanted to argue, to insist that this wasn't his fight. But something in Saray's words struck a chord. How many times had he run from responsibility? How many people had he left behind in his determination to survive at any cost? "Fine," he said at last. "What do we need to do?" Before Saray could answer, the archive doors slammed shut with a resonating boom. The mechanical voice announced, "Archives sealed. Emergency protocols engaged." Sarai's eyes widened. They've overridden the security systems faster than should be possible. Unless... A new voice spoke from the shadows at the far end of the archive. "Unless someone had intimate knowledge of the temple's defenses. Someone who had studied them for years, perhaps?" A tall figure stepped into the light, a man with sharp features and calculating eyes, wearing armor that appeared to be a modern adaptation of the Order's traditional garb. He was flanked by two heavily armed guards, their weapons trained on Taven and Saray. "Kalis," Saray breathed, her face pale with shock. "How is this possible? You should be dead." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Death is merely a limitation for those who lack vision, dear Saray. The Order's research into dimensional energy had applications far beyond what our elders were willing to explore. Applications I have had centuries to perfect." Taven looked between them, comprehension dawning. This is the guy who locked you up? The one from the vision I saw? Vision? Kalis turned his attention to Taven, his gaze sharpening. Interesting. The blade has shown you things, has it? And yet you still live. Most unauthorized wielders are consumed by its energy within moments. He bears traces of the bloodline, Saray said, her tone making it clear this revelation was as surprising to her as to Kalis. Diluted by generations, but present enough for the blade to accept his touch. Kalis studied Taven with new interest. A descendant of the Order, scraping by as a common scavenger. How the mighty have fallen. He gestured to his guards. Take the blade. Kill the scavenger if you must. But I want Saray alive. The guards advanced, weapons raised. Taven gripped the sword tightly, its weight suddenly reassuring in his hand. Any advice on how to fight these guys? He muttered to Saray. Trust the blade, she replied softly. It knows what to do, even if you do not. The first guard fired, the energy bolt searing through the air toward them. Taven raised the sword instinctively, not expecting it to provide any real protection against energy weapons. To his astonishment, the bolt struck the blade and was absorbed, the glyphs on the crossguard flaring brilliantly as they channeled the energy. Okay, that's useful, Taven said, a grim smile forming on his lips. The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Kalis scowled. Shoot to kill. The blade will survive, even if its wielder does not. Both guards opened fire. Taven moved with a speed and grace he hadn't known he possessed, the sword guiding his movements as much as he guided it. Energy bolts were deflected or absorbed, never reaching their targets. With each successful defense, the sword's glow intensified, power building within it. The blade is reaching resonance capacity, Saray warned. Release the energy before it overwhelms you. How? Taven asked through gritted teeth, struggling to maintain his defense as the guards advanced, still firing. Strike the floor. Visualize the energy spreading outward in a wave. Taven swung the sword downward, driving its point into the stone floor. A shock wave of blue-white energy exploded outward, knocking the guards off their feet and sending them crashing into the distant shelves. Kalis alone remained standing, protected by some unseen energy field that shimmered around him as the wave passed. Impressive, Kalis said, his smile growing colder. But ultimately futile. He raised his hand, revealing a device embedded in his palm, a glowing red crystal surrounded by metallic implants that merged with his flesh. I have evolved beyond the need for primitive weapons. A beam of crimson energy lanced from his palm, striking Saray before either she or Taven could react. She crumpled to the floor, her body rigid, face contorted in pain. Psychic bindings, Kalis explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather. An application of dimensional energy the elders forbade. It allows direct control of another's nervous system. Quite painful, I'm told, but remarkably effective. Taven lunged at Kalis, sword raised for a killing blow. The man didn't move, merely redirecting his palm toward Taven. The red beam struck him in the chest, and suddenly, every nerve in his body was on fire. He fell to his knees, the sword clattering from his grasp. I expected more from someone who managed to wield the Awakener's blade, Kalis said, disappointment evident in his voice. But then, blood will tell. Yours is clearly too diluted to be of real use. Through the haze of pain, Taven saw Saray struggling against her own invisible bonds, her eyes fixed on the fallen sword. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. Was she trying to tell him something? Kalis approached, kicking the sword away from Taven's reaching fingers. 2 centuries I've searched for this, he said, bending to examine the blade without touching it. The key to unlimited power, to reshaping reality itself. And now, finally, it's mine. He straightened, turning his attention back to Saray. You will help me access the heart, of course. The final locks respond only to the last heir's biometric signature. A precaution I overlooked in my haste before, but one I'm prepared for now. Sarai's only response was a defiant glare. Kalis sighed theatrically. Always so stubborn. The bindings can be adjusted to allow speech. You know, all you need do is agree to cooperate. Taven watched as Kalis manipulated the device in his palm, the beam's color shifting from red to purple. Sarai gasped as the bindings partially released, allowing her to speak. I will never help you access the heart, she spat. You betrayed everything the Order stood for. You helped bring about the very destruction we were sworn to prevent. Prevention was never the goal, Kalis said, his voice hardening. Power was. Power to reshape this flawed world, to guide humanity toward its true potential. The elders were too timid, too bound by tradition to see the possibilities. You're insane, Sarai said. The heart was never meant to be controlled by any single entity. Its power is too great, too unstable. Because no one had the vision to harness it properly, Kalis countered. I do. 2 centuries of study, of preparation. The cataclysm was merely the first step, clearing away the old to make room for the new. As they argued, Taven's pain began to recede. The bindings were designed for control, not death. And Kalis's attention was focused on Sarai. Slowly, imperceptibly, Taven began to move, dragging himself across the floor toward the discarded sword. And what of the cost? Sarai demanded, her voice rising in anger. How many died in your first step? Millions? Tens of millions? Was your ambition worth their lives? Every revolution demands sacrifice, Kalis said dismissively. Those who died were merely the price of progress. Taven's fingers closed around the sword's hilt. Immediately, warmth flooded through him, dulling the remaining pain of the bindings. He could feel the blade's energy pulsing, resonating with something deep within himself, a connection he hadn't recognized before. Sarai's eyes flickered to him briefly. Then back to Kalis. She was creating a distraction, Taven realized, keeping Kalis's attention focused on her while he recovered. You speak of progress, but all I see is ruin, Sarai was saying. You didn't elevate humanity. You nearly destroyed it. And for what? So you could play God with powers you don't understand? Kalis's face darkened with anger. I understand the heart better than anyone alive, better than the elders ever did. I have unlocked secrets they never dreamed of. Like how to live for 200 years, Taven asked, his voice rough but steady as he struggled to his feet, the sword gripped firmly in both hands. That's not natural, man. You look pretty good for a couple of centuries. I'll give you that. But there's something wrong about you. Something broken. Kalis spun to face him, surprise quickly replaced by cold calculation. The binding should have kept you immobilized. Yeah. Well, I've always been hard to keep down. Taven raised the sword, its blade now glowing with internal light. Sarai, if you've got any more tricks up your sleeve, now would be a good time. Sarai closed her eyes, concentrating. The psychic bindings around her flickered as she fought against them. The blade, she gasped. Its true name. Speak it. I don't know its name, Taven protested as Kalis raised his palm, the red crystal pulsing with renewed energy. Ethereum, Sarai whispered, the word barely audible. Kalis fired another beam of crimson energy at Taven. This time, he was ready, raising the sword to intercept it. The beam struck the blade and was absorbed as the energy bolts had been. But instead of being contained, the energy seemed to flow through the sword and into Taven himself. It burned along his veins, not painful but overwhelming, like being filled with liquid fire. Ethereum, Taven repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue. Awakener's blade! Ethereum, I call you! The sword erupted with blinding light, its resonance reaching a fever pitch that shook the very foundations of the archive. The glyphs on its crossguard blazed like captured stars, and Taven felt knowledge pouring into his mind. How to channel the energy, how to shape it, how to release it with devastating precision. Kalis screamed in rage and fear, firing beam after beam from his palm, but each was absorbed and added to the growing maelstrom of power. The psychic bindings around Sarai shattered, freeing her to add her own will to Taven's, her hands rising to shape complex patterns in the air. "Now, Taven!" she shouted over the deafening resonance. "Release the energy! Focus on Kalis's mind!" Taven thrust the sword forward, directing all the accumulated power in a concentrated beam that struck Kalis squarely in the forehead. The man's scream cut off abruptly as he was lifted off his feet and slammed against the far wall of the archive. The red crystal in his palm exploded, shards embedding themselves in his flesh as he collapsed to the floor. The resonance faded, the sword's glow dimming to a faint pulse. Taven stood panting, his entire body trembling with the aftermath of channeling such power. "Is he dead?" he asked, nodding toward Kalis's crumpled form. Sarai approached cautiously, kneeling beside her former betrayer. "No, but his mind is shattered." The psychic backlash destroyed the neural pathways he had altered to extend his life and amplify his abilities. She stood, her expression somber. "He will live, but as a shell of what he was. Perhaps, in time, he may rebuild enough of himself to face justice for what he's done." "Justice after 200 years seems a bit late," Taven observed. "Justice is never too late," Sarai replied. "The dead deserve remembrance, and the living deserve truth." She turned to Taven, her gaze softening slightly. "You wielded the blade well, despite your lack of training. There is indeed order blood in your veins, however diluted." Taven looked down at the sword, still humming faintly in his hand. "What happens now, to this heart thing?" "The heart of worlds remains secure for the moment, but its containment is failing. Without the order to maintain it, it will eventually destabilize. When that happens," she gestured to the world outside, "the cataclysm will seem minor in comparison." "Great. No pressure or anything?" Taven sighed, then held out the sword to Sarai. "Here, this belongs to you. I just wanted some salvage, not the fate of the world on my shoulders." Sarai looked at the offered blade, then at Taven's face. After a long moment, she shook her head. "The blade chose you as much as you chose it. The order as it was is gone. Taven Reese. Perhaps it is time for something new to take its place." "What, me? I'm no guardian or whatever. I'm just a scavenger trying to survive."
"And yet, when faced with Kalis's power, you chose to fight rather than flee. You stood against evil when you could have run."
Sarai placed her hand over his on the sword's hilt. "The order was never about bloodlines or tradition. Not truly. It was about duty, about standing between the innocent and that which would harm them." The temple around them shuddered, dust falling from the ceiling as the structure settled. With Kalis's influence removed, the overridden security systems were resetting, ancient mechanisms grinding back to life. "We should leave," Taven said, glancing up nervously. "This place doesn't feel very stable." Sarai nodded. "The temple's primary wards can be restored, but not today. We will need to return with proper equipment, perhaps allies."
"We? Unless you have other plans," Sarai raised an eyebrow. "The blade connects us now. Taven Reese, your fate and mine are intertwined, at least until the heart is secure."
Taven considered this, weighing the responsibility against his instinct to run, to remain unattached. He thought of the orphans at Outpost Kell, of the scattered settlements struggling to survive in the ash-choked wasteland. What difference had his scavenging ever made to them? What legacy would he leave behind? "All right," he said finally. "But we do this together. No more secrets. No more "I command, you obey" nonsense. Partners. Sarai seemed surprised by the condition, but after a moment she nodded. Partners. The old ways died with the order. Perhaps it is time for new traditions. They made their way out of the archives, past the still unconscious guards, and through the training hall to a secondary exit Sarai remembered from her time before stasis. The temple's automated defenses ignored them now, the blade's resonance marking them as authorized personnel. As they emerged into the ash-filtered sunlight, Taven felt a strange sense of purpose he had never known before. The sword, Ethereum, was a comfortable weight at his side, its energy a constant presence at the edge of his awareness. Sarai shielded her eyes, taking in the devastated landscape with visible sorrow. "So much lost," she murmured. "So much to rebuild." "We'll start small," Taven said. "Outpost Kell isn't far. They have engineers, farmers, even some scholars. People trying to piece the world back together, bit by bit." "And they will follow you, a scavenger?" Taven smiled grimly. "They'll follow this." He touched the sword's hilt. "People need symbols, hope. Even in the outposts, stories of the order persist. When they see the Awakener's blade, when they hear what we're trying to do, they will rally," Sarai finished, a hint of her own smile forming. "As they did in the early days of the order, before hierarchy and secrecy took root." They began the long walk toward Outpost Kell, the twin suns beginning their descent toward the horizon. In the distance, the silhouettes of other settlements were visible, small points of human perseverance in a broken world. "I never asked," Taven said as they walked. "What does the blade's name mean? Ethereum?" "In the old tongue, it means bridge between worlds," Sarai replied. "But perhaps, in this new age, it will come to mean bridge between past and future instead." Taven nodded, watching as a group of travelers on the horizon changed course, heading toward them. Word spread quickly in the wasteland. Already, people were gathering, drawn by the promise of something new. "Ethereum," he said, feeling the name resonate within him. "I like the sound of that." Together, they walked toward the gathering crowd, the sword gleaming in the dying light. No longer just a piece of salvage, but a beacon of hope for a world reborn from ash.